What do the by-election results say about our maturity as a 42-year-old nation? What influenced voters in 2023? In our culture, are consolation prizes the norm for candidates who have been rejected at the polls? Today is Sunday, the 29th of October, 2023. You're listening to another edition of The Big Issues on Observer Radio 91.1 FM, and I'm your host, Barbara Arundel. Just a reminder that all comments made by guests on The Big Issues are the sole views and opinions of the guests and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the host, board of directors, or management and staff of Observer Radio News Co. Limited. At this point in time, I'm going to welcome to the Zoom platform Member of Parliament Asot Michael. He is the MP for the constituency of St. Peter. He served as an MP in the ABLP administration from 2004 to January 2023. In January, he ran as an independent candidate against the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party, the United Progressive Party, and the DNA to retain his seat in Parliament. Member of Parliament Asot Michael, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, Ms. Arundel. Good afternoon to the Observer listening public on the radio and on social media. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It was a historic week in Antigua and Barbuda. Yes, there have been by-elections held before in this country, but none triggered by the events that led to the October 2023 election. We listen now to the voice of Dr. Jackie Quinn to hear the official numbers from that by-election.
MP Simon, the candidate for the United Progressive Party, whipped his opponents soundly, capturing 1,065 votes to Dwayne George of the Antigua-Barbuda Labour Party's 891 and Andrew Antonio of the Democratic National Alliance's 8 votes. There were 5 rejected ballots. Simon beat George by 173 votes, and that's 26 votes less than the 199 which he beat Samantha Marshall by in January. In the general elections, Simon amassed 1,061 votes, whilst Marshall garnered 862 votes. In the general election, 1,940 voters cast ballots. In this by-election, 1,966 of the 2,717 registered voters actually went out to vote, 26 more than the general election.
And there we heard the voice of Dr. Jackie Quinn as she gave us the results the following morning as part of Observer AM. So the first thing we're going to tackle is that question. What do the by-election results say about our maturity as a 42-year-old nation?
Well, first of all, I think it says a lot as it relates to the maturity of our 42-year-old nation. First, significantly, Ms. Arundel, the evidence of this and maybe South by-election result is that the people are taking responsibility to stand for what is true, to stand for what is right and what is just, and indeed to call out corrupt, incompetent government. I think that the people are no longer afraid in this country to face up to wannabe dictators and to remind them that in democracy the people are in charge, not the politicians. And the power of the people is always greater than the people in power. And the reality is that in defeat, Ms. Arundel, Gaston Browne claims that the main increase of 29 votes for Senator Dwayne George, a 1.5% increase according to the Prime Minister over Samantha Marshall, was phenomenal. And that was a phenomenal result that qualified as the losing candidate to be rewarded with the appointment of Junior Minister of Finance. And according to the media reports, Gaston Browne said with only a few short months of being selected as the party's candidate, and I'm quoting him, George's performance in the by-election was phenomenal, and his party celebrates. I don't know what they're really celebrating. I mean, what exactly did they achieve? The reality is the ABLP candidate lost. And with the support from the ABLP, millions of dollars being spent by the government, coffers, and the Prime Minister, than Samantha Marshall could ever have dreamed of. Both Gaston Browne, who was really, in reality, the candidate, as we all know, lost the constituency that Samantha Marshall won in 2 consecutive elections. So I think it really says a lot about us in terms of maturity.
Mr. Michael, MP Michael, Was this
Yes.
a free and fair election, in your opinion?
First of all, in the 2023 general elections, and before I do that, I would say that the election, this by-election, was free, as I think all by-elections and general elections in the country are free. But of course it wasn't fair. You have a government in power, and any government, whether it's the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party or the United Progressive Party for that matter, they have the access to state resources, to the Ministry of Public Works, to creation of jobs, to give away land, houses. And, when a government is in power, they have an unfair advantage over the opposition candidate. And of course we saw that. The Ministry of Public Works moved in and spent millions of dollars in terms of infrastructure and schools and air conditioning and so forth in St. Mary South by election in the space of 3 months. But the 2023 general elections, voters across Antigua and Barbuda, we need to be reminded that it told the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party, and in particular Prime Minister Gaston Browne, in no uncertain terms that it's bogged down with a leader that the people do not want. And therefore, we needed a leadership reset. And many of the comrades in the Labour Party, including myself, believe that the party of VC Bird has lost its mission. It is plagued by mismanagement and has been paralyzed by delusions of exceptionalism into a state of decline. So, it was bad at the time of the general election. It is worse now after the by-election. And you may ask yourself what influenced voters in 2023, both in the general elections and now in the by-election. And I would say, for starters, first, corrupt, incompetent, and selfish leadership. Secondly, the rising unemployment and underemployment in the country, and the rising cost of living. Let's face it, the intensification, Ms. Arundel, of the struggle of people in this country on a day-to-day basis to survive. The inadequate water services still has not been solved after nearly 9 years of being in government. That is the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party. And the inadequate health care services and our educational system. Take crime, the rising crime in the country where people don't feel safe to stay at their homes or even to go to their businesses sometimes in broad daylight. So all of those factors influence voters, both in January, it was bad at the time of the general election, and it's worse now after the by-election. I think it's important that we realize that and reiterate that it was the Prime Minister who was running against Kelvin Shugi-Shimon, not Mr. Senator George. And we must realize, talking about abuse and government resources, that the Prime Minister used his position in government as Prime Minister with record election campaign spending in the last 3 months from the public purse to influence voters. And that says a lot. He campaigned day in, day out, personally. He paid for airline tickets, as is reported, of a significant number of voters living overseas to come home to vote for the Labour Party candidate in this by-election. And he went house to house, boasting up and down about himself as Antigua and Barbuda's best leader, his best Prime Minister ever, claiming credit for every single thing under the sun that has happened in Antigua and Barbuda since independence. Effectively, he was the candidate. And listen, you made the assertion that, people should not really change their minds in the space of 6 months from January to now. But what about the threats? The Prime Minister threatened the people. There are witnesses that he threatened the people of St. Mary South with victimization and weaponization of public resources against them if they dared to not vote for his party's candidate. He stated repeatedly during the campaign that the UPP parliamentary representative would not get nothing done for St. Mary South because they're in opposition. And under his government, he would get absolutely no road infrastructure, no jobs, no lands, no housing. And therefore they should vote for the candidate that would be in government. And that alone is intimidation. That is tactics by a dictator where he staked his increasingly unpopular leadership on the St. Mary South by-election, and the reality is he was decisively defeated. So that's the point I want. Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Arundel.
That's not a problem at all. We're now going to listen to the voice of the the leader of the opposition at this point in time, and we'll hear what he said while speaking with Dr. Quinn a few days ago.
Because it shows that the people are more focused on the issues. That movement that MP Simon spoke about just now in terms of moving from that type of mindset where you give me $1 and I'll support you, to the mindset, show me your track record, show me what you have accomplished.
Yeah.
And it works so well that they hurriedly put a list of accomplishments for Dwayne George on the eve of the election.
Yes.
And it is simply testimony that our strategy and messaging worked.
Right.
And worked tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
The young people in the various communities. I recall us meeting with a group of young men yesterday who they're not going to the polls until they have a discussion with Mr. Simon.
Very good.
And we spent at least an hour where Mr. Simon had to outline his plans and how they can be a part of that plan going forward to develop their community. So it's not just sit back and allow the MP to come up with a plan. They wanted the commitment from MP Simon that they're going to be a part of the development of their community. And I think that was quite impressive.
And there we heard from the Member of Parliament, leader of the United Progressive Party, Jamal Pringle. MP Asot Michael, what influence does money have on an election? I mean, does the candidate with the most money automatically win the by-election?
Not automatically, and we saw this in the by-election. I mean, people have claimed and made allegations that I've spent millions of dollars over the years in St. Peter's. I mean, money does play a fact and does play an important role in elections, and make no mistake about it. But it's not the only deciding factor. And if it was money, Senator Dwayne George would have been the candidate this time. Yeah, and if it was money, the Labour Party would not have reduced their votes or their seats in the House, their popular vote in the country, and then reduced it from 15 seats in the House down to 9. So money does play a part. I mean, we should not shy away from that. But essentially, this by-election result confirmed the desire of the people for the St. Mary's South, for the change they voted for in the general election. Let's not forget that. The people are tired of the self-centered, the arrogant, bombastic, and the crude and rude, disrespectful leadership conduct of Gaston Browne. I mean, Gaston Browne actually put up his middle finger at elderly voters, just on the eve of election, the night before election, in Johnson's Point and in Boland's. And that is totally unbecoming of a prime minister. Had I done that, they would have plastered me all over this country as a vagabond. And I say that the people in St. Mary's South and the people in the country, they have had enough of this kind of behavior from their leaders. And indeed, this by-election was a referendum on the popularity of the Prime Minister right across the length and breadth of Antigua and Barbuda, and his suitability to continue as the leader of the ABLP and Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda. I mean, his leadership was rejected at the general election when the ALP lost the popular vote, which I just said. And so he made this by-election about him, and he alone, and his leadership. So, that's my take on it.
Why didn't money play a bigger part in terms of influencing voters in 2023?
Because the people wanted to change the government. Let's make no bones about it. The UPP and myself, the independent candidate, and the BPM got the popular vote in January 2023 general elections, albeit that the Labour Party retained 9 seats and became the government. And the Labour Party overspent the UPP by millions of dollars. And of course, as I previously said, they had the state coffers, the Treasury, the Ministry of Public Works, and different divisions of the government to spend and hand out government resources on the electorate, where the opposition didn't. And they still lost the popular vote. So money does not always influence voters. They may take your money and still vote against you. And we saw that clearly in this by-election a few days ago. It's all about Gaston Browne's self-interest politics of empowering those who do his bidding, whether they're UPP or not, and crucifying those who do not. That's the point. I mean, Gaston Browne has spoken a lot this year about resetting Antigua and Barbuda with the team he chose to govern after the general elections. But for starters, how can a nation reset with a leader who, instead of leading by example and resetting himself to serve the people, he continuously works to serve only himself? And don't think that the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party under its current leader is described by party faithful as a closed world by mistake, where the comrades are speaking in support of the leader and his radio station, and this is termed as, meritocracy, for which incompetence is rewarded with top government jobs and statutory board appointments. So what credible reset strategy can the Prime Minister lead without first resetting himself out of his own incompetence, his intemperate behavior, his intolerance, his disrespectful, his uncaring and undemocratic conduct? And that is where Kelvin Shuggy Simon beat both he and Dwayne George. Because Kelvin Shuggy Simon is a caring person. He has a heart for the people. And the people of St. Mary's South knows that. They know who is Kelvin Shuggy Simon. But they know that Dwayne George is a turncoat who was bought as a mercenary and switched overnight from the UPP from being the closest ally of Kelvin Shuggy Simon to the Labour Party. Now he's the star boy. Now he's been rewarded as Junior Minister of Finance, the second most powerful ministry or position that you can hold in the government.
So we're going to listen to something out of a news report.
Now, I've appointed Minister George as a minister within the Ministry of Finance because I also want to take personal responsibility for his development. He's a young man still in his 30s, who I believe has a lot to offer the people of Antigua and Barbuda. He's also an economist, so he's not coming empty-headed or empty-handed. He's coming with some equity, with some intellectual resources that he can utilize for the benefit of the people of Antigua and Barbuda. And certainly, as my opportunities to him and to coach him and to support him. But you can be assured now that with the status that he has within our government, that he'll be able to do more for the people of St. Mary's South, many of whom are present here today.
In his inaugural address, George said he wants to continue to be a voice for the people of St. Mary's South in Parliament, and he will also seek to continue to obtain foreign direct investment for the country.
Well, the plan is to continue the work in St. Mary's South constituency, continue to meet the people, continue to touch in the flesh, continue to beat the pavement, and wait for the next election. Well, with my career and expertise in economics, my contribution to that would be very significant because I do know the laws and principles of economics, so I'll be able to, put policies in place to improve our economy, to improve our GDP, improve our national income, so that, more opportunities can be created for the younger folks, the middle age and the elderly in Antigua and Barbuda.
However, George's by-election opponent, the UPP's Simon, claims the appointment is just another political gimmick by the government.
People's eyes are open. Even if they pave the streets gold, it is going to be a hard task for them to win back St. Mary's South. Because anything they do at this point is just going to come like an election gimmick. And bear in mind, too, once it's a general election, the type of support that Dwayne had in this by-election is not going to be possible. The Prime Minister campaigning rigorously for Dwayne, as he did in this by-election, cannot happen at the national level, because all man for themselves at that time. So if they cannot win a by-election with their government in power, with all the resources of government available to them, I cannot see how they're going to win it in a general election.
That was the United Progressive Party's Kelvin Simon.
Mr. Michael, in our culture, are consolation prizes of that sort now the norm for candidates who are rejected at the polls? And if it is that what we should be doing always?
Absolutely not. I mean, the people says no, but Gaston Browne says yes. Because he's not working for the people. Gaston Browne is working for himself. He's using the resources of the people to build his army of yes men and women who he hopes will help him to remain in power indefinitely. I mean, I sat in the cabinet and in elections with the Prime Minister. We went to, prior to us even becoming in the government in 2014. where he told candidates in no uncertain terms that they lose their seat, don't even expect a position in the Senate. And now he had done a 360-degree turn. I mean, how do you think that other comrades in the party feel that he has displaced? Even the branch at St. Mary South, the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party branch, they displaced Samantha Marshall, who has won 2 consecutive elections for the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party. And despite his colleagues and the executive advising him against this bold and ill-advised gamble by replacing her with this chosen candidate, Dwayne George, a former United Progressive member and a close ally of Kelvin Simon and a campaign person on his branch. So this move, despite the opposition of his own party members, has proven to be a costly mistake. Very costly. And it has weakened the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party to its foundation and has put their political future in jeopardy. Make no mistake about it. The recent by-election in St. Mary South was not a contest, I said, between Kelvin Simon and Dwayne George, but rather a battle between the Prime Minister and Shuggie. So, unfortunately for Browne, this high-stakes political game has turned into a monumental failure. So he has to save face on what he has done. He has rewarded him and made him Minister of State in his ministry, in the Ministry of Finance. I mean, why didn't he reward Comrade Lennox Weston after losing his seat? I mean, I know he lost badly, but I mean, still, there are other members of the Labour Party who lost in the last election, and they have no place in the Senate or no ministry. So, this is a clear indication that Gaston Browne and our Prime Minister is building up his own power base. He doesn't care about the Labour Party and the comrades, really. But he cares about his yes men, people telling him and will be loyal to him and, will be begotten to him, beholden to him as the political leader and the Prime Minister. So I definitely think that over the years, our culture of giving consolation prizes is not the norm for candidates rejected at the polls. Yes, sometimes we put them in the Senate, but certainly not to give them such a high-profile, important job as Junior Minister of Finance.
This idea of having rejected candidates in positions. Why has this been done? People, the members of the Senate almost seem as if they tend to be the rejected candidates. How do you respond to that? And that it's not just an ALP thing, it's not just a Gaston Browne thing, but it is in fact a part of our culture.
First I would say that both the UPP and ALP have placed persons who have lost in general elections in the Senate. I mean, even Samantha Marshall lost her seat and she was given a Minister of State with responsibility for a ministry. But the important point I want to make here, Barbara, and to your listening audience, is by Gaston Browne disregarding and having total contempt for the concerns and opposition within his own party. First, to replace Samantha Marshall with a strong UPP supporter, there is clear indication that the majority of the voters in St. Mary South have rejected Browne's interference and his attempt to strengthen his cabinet by doing so. And also, it paints a picture of Browne's misguided decisions. I mean, despite barely scraping through the general election, he's now hand-chosen a candidate, Dwayne George, a UPP. And now he has suffered a resounding defeat by the by-election. You're going to give him the Junior Minister of State of Finance, which controls the purses of the public treasury, where he can build up his power base now to go and give as many duty-frees as he wants to voters in St. Mary South and give them jobs and so forth. I will just say, on this matter, by disregarding the concerns of the executive and his colleagues, it shows the complete lack of respect of Gaston Browne for the democratic process and the voices of his executive members. Instead of carefully considering the potential consequences of his actions, Gaston Browne chose to play politics with the future of the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party and the people of St. Mary South. Because this gamble not only cost the ABLP the support of the majority, but it's also weakened the party internally. How do you think Samantha Marshall feels? And the other colleagues like Dean Jonas and Lennox Weston who lost their seats in the last general election. Lennox Weston has not even made an advisor. An advisor, I didn't say to put him in the Senate, to the Prime Minister on Finance. So I think that the central executive of the Labour Party must now take a hard look at this loss and acknowledge the role of the Prime Minister's reckless decision played in it, because the party's credibility has been tarnished, and make no mistake about that. And his members are now questioning the disposition and judgment of their leader. And that's the reality of the situation.
Member of Parliament Asot Michael, in 2 minutes, if you can just wrap up for us your closing thoughts.
And thank you for having me today. I think that the comrades in the Labour Party presently has no doubt in their minds about the necessity of a reset against the toxic leadership practice of putting other comrades down to make the leader good. I mean, the Prime Minister labelled after the last general elections in January his colleagues as lazy, as dishonest and corrupt, and he laid the responsibility for the significant decline of the ABLP members in Parliament squarely at their feet. So, he blames, he's an insecure leader who relentlessly blames everyone but himself for the lack of performance of his government. But instead, the same leadership that the comrades want to reset is posturing to reset the governance of the country with the same unacceptable anti-democratic practices that justify the necessity of a leadership reset. So in closing, I would say that voters of St. Mary's South have made it abundantly clear that they reject Browne's interference and his chosen candidate. And this defeat serves as a stark reminder to Gaston Browne and to the Antigua and Barbuda Labour Party that they cannot underestimate the will and the determination of the people. The by-election outcome is a resounding message that the constituents of St. Mary's South will not be swayed by political maneuvering and will hold their leaders accountable for their actions. And that's what happened. Thank you very much for having me today. It's a privilege.